Well, the first thing you gotta realize, brother, is this right here is the future of wrestling. You can call this the new world order of wrestling, brother.
When you think of the greatest factions of all time in professional wrestling, the New World Order is probably the first one that comes to your mind. It revolutionized WCW and made the WWF have to change its strategy and create the Attitude Era just to compete. The nWo was a huge success in WCW, and eventually they made their way to the WWE. The nWo should have been a home run for the WWE, but it only ended up lasting 6 months in the company. Today, we're going to look back and see why the WWE and the nWo did not work. When Eric Bischoff took charge of WCW, one thing he wanted to do was make it different from what they were doing in the past. WCW was a small regional southern promotion, and Eric Bischoff needed big talent to help grow the brand. One of the biggest names he brought in right away was Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan had left the WWF at the time and was focusing on his acting career. Eric Bischoff opened the checkbook and Hulk Hogan was signed to World Championship Wrestling. Hulk Hogan wore the red and yellow colors and was pretty much the same version of Hulk that we'd seen in the WWF. Meanwhile, in the WWF, the new generation was happening. The strategy at the time was to eliminate all the older guys such as Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and to focus on the younger, up-and-coming talent. It was a youth movement for them. Among these stars were Big Daddy Cool Diesel and the bad guy Razor Ramon. Diesel and Razor were buddies and a part of the Clique, alongside Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and X-Pac. When Diesel and Razor's contracts were coming up in the WWF, they had negotiated with Eric Bischoff and World Championship Wrestling. Diesel had gotten a sweet contract deal and told Razor that he should come with him to WCW. Razor and Diesel's contracts in the WWF were expiring just a week apart from each other, and they ended up signing with World Championship Wrestling. Razor Ramon would make the first appearance under the name Scott Hall. He would tell everyone that they were outsiders and WCW needs to look out for more to come. It was an awesome debut for Scott Hall. He came through the crowd. Eric Bischoff really made it look like Scott Hall was invading from the WWF. A week later, Diesel appeared under the name Kevin Nash, and he would show up as Scott Hall's mystery partner. They would then challenge WCW to a match at Bash of the Beach 1996. It would be a match with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash versus Sting, Lex Luger, and the Macho Man Randy Savage. Near the end of the match, as the outsiders were taking it to WCW, Hulk Hogan came down to the ring looking to make the save. But instead, he turned his back on WCW and dropped a leg on Randy Savage. And they were off to the races. The New World Order was formed. The angle worked for so many reasons. They made them look like they were invaders from the WWF who were here to take over WCW. They had awesome backstage promos filmed in black and white with them talking. These promos were so different from traditional wrestling promos at the time, they didn't seem scripted. They would randomly show up and beat up the WCW roster. They seemed on another level and distanced themselves from the normal wrestling program that you were accustomed to. Eventually, they would add more members to the group. At one point, the Giant joined. The 1-2-3 Kid joined under the name Six-Pac, and the faction grew and became a beast. As all good things do, the nWo eventually ended. They built it up so big that they even had a sub-faction with the nWo Wolfpack. Near the end of WCW, they even tried to bring it back with the nWo 2000, but it was never the same as the original group with Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall. In 2001, WCW was bought out by the WWF. When this happened, talent had a choice. Do they go to the WWF, try their chances there, or do they sit at home and collect the paychecks that Ted Turner and that organization owed them? Hogan, Hall, and Nash, they decided to sit at home and collect the money that they were owed. Yes, there was some contract issues and legal battles between a few of them and WCW, but ultimately, they would collect money for doing nothing. In 2002, Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall would find their way to the WWF under the banner, the nWo. In a kayfabe storyline on TV, Vince McMahon had become partners with Ric Flair. Vince and Ric Flair owned 50% of the World Wrestling Federation.
You don't mean... Woo! The consortium was me, and now you and I are limousine riding, jet flying, stealing, wheeling dealing, son of a gun. You know why? Because we're partners. What? Oh my God! Flair and McMahon are partners! Yeah!
Ric Flair was driving Vince McMahon crazy, and Vince would say that Ric Flair is going to kill the WWF. And his answer was to bring in the nWo. In a set of creepy backstage videos, Vince was seen staring at a mirror saying that the WWF has terminal cancer. He turned around, and in his chair there was an nWo logo on the back of the chair. Behind the scenes, this was a bit different. When the WWF had bought out WCW, there was definitely a void left in the wrestling world. What could they do to fix this? Well, a brand split. They would eventually do the Raw vs. SmackDown brand storyline, but before this, they were going to bring in Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall. The original idea was to have Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash come in and lead a stable of Renegades, not known as the nWo at this time. Vince McMahon didn't really care for using Scott Hall at the time. Vince also didn't really like the Outsiders invading the WWF storyline, and he didn't want to use the nWo, which wasn't created by him. So they were going to have Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels be this Renegade group. The Renegade group could be able to go on any brand when they finally decided that they were going to do the brand split. Kevin Nash ended up convincing everyone that Scott Hall should be a part of the group. And as plans changed, they decided instead of doing the Renegade group, they would bring in the New World Order. So the promo that aired with Vince spinning around in the chair and the nWo officially coming into the WWF happened. The problem was that the contracts with the three guys had not yet been signed, according to Hulk Hogan. We can only assume that Vince had to pay Hulk whatever he wanted once he announced that the nWo was coming in, because if he didn't, it wouldn't really be the New World Order. We can assume that Vince did this promo without letting Hogan, Hall, and Nash know, so that they could see the reaction around it and build buzz so that they would sign deals with the WWF. The first appearance from the group was at No Way Out 2002, where they showed up and cut an in-ring promo. They stated that they weren't here to kill the WWF, they were here to make it better. But that was a lie, and they would target two of the WWF's biggest stars, The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Eventually, The Rock would face Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania in one of the biggest matches of all time, and Stone Cold Steve Austin and Scott Hall would have a decent match at the same WrestleMania. The nWo would assault both The Rock and Stone Cold separately. They ran a semi-truck into The Rock as he was in an ambulance, and they crushed a cinder block over the knee of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Leading up to WrestleMania 18, The Rock called out Hulk Hogan to the ring and challenged him to a match at the Showcase of the Immortals. This was an iconic moment, and everybody wanted to see this match. WrestleMania 18 happened, and Stone Cold had beaten Scott Hall with the Stone Cold Stunner. This was a decent match, however, I still wonder what it would have been like to see Stone Cold versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania. Then, we have The Rock versus Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Before I talk about the match, I need to express something huge here. This was the first time we saw Hulk Hogan in a WWF singles match since the 90s, and we were in Toronto, Canada. If you're unfamiliar with the Canadian audience, well, they love Hulk Hogan. Before the match even began, the crowd was off the charts. You could see the crowd was split almost down the middle. Half the crowd cheered for The Rock, and half the crowd cheered for Hulk Hogan. As it went along, though, you could see that Hulk Hogan was clearly the crowd favorite. The Rock would end up picking up the victory here, and they would shake hands at the end of the match. It was one of those WrestleMania moments that you always hear about. As a result of Hogan shaking hands with The Rock and getting a positive response from the crowd at WrestleMania, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall turned on him. Hogan would no longer be in the nWo. Instead, he would occasionally be partners with The Rock and Kane. It was clear at this point that the direction they were going was to have Hulk Hogan do a singles run, and they didn't really care too much about the nWo storyline. Now, with Hogan out of the nWo and Hall and Nash around, they brought in former nWo member X-Pac to join the group. They further split the group up when they drafted the New World Order to Raw, and Hulk Hogan was drafted to SmackDown when they finally ended up doing the brand split. For the next 2 weeks, the nWo feuded with Kane until he was lured backstage by X-Pac and was put out of action by having his head smashed with a chair. Following this, Kevin Nash was suspended for attacking Kane in the storyline. He had to recover from an injured bicep. X-Pac would begin wearing Kane's mask, taunting him on the fact that he put him out of action. Bradshaw, who had come to Kane's aid, fought Scott Hall at Backlash, which Scott Hall won from the help of X-Pac. Big Show, who was once with the nWo as the Giant, joined the nWo on the April 22nd episode of Raw. The nWo was shortly joined by Ric Flair. Yes, Ric Flair joined the nWo. He attacked Stone Cold Steve Austin with a chair, and Scott Hall was ejected out of the group and fired from Raw for repeatedly dropping the ball on Stone Cold Steve Austin. In all actuality, Hall asked for his release from the WWF for personal reasons. Lacking members, Ric Flair would recruit Booker T. He would continue his feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin. Austin defeated Big Show and Flair in a handicap match at Judgment Day. Booker T, now in the group, his sidekick Goldust attempted many times but failed to get in with the rest of the members of the nWo. And soon, they became frustrated with Booker T. With Kevin Nash returning and attempting to rebuild the nWo, he brought in Shawn Michaels into the faction on the June 3rd episode of Monday Night Raw. This goes back to that Renegade stable that they were originally going to do. Shawn Michaels then literally kicked Booker T out of the nWo a week later, and in midst of a 4-year retirement from pro wrestling, he became the first nWo member that never wrestled in WCW. Michaels and Nash then would set their sights on recruiting Triple H by using threats and demands, but they never got him to go into the group as the storyline just fizzled out. On July 8, 2002, Kevin Nash tore his quad after delivering a big boot to Booker T, ultimately putting him back on the injured list. On the following Raw, Vince McMahon came out to the ring to the entrance of the nWo's music. He made an announcement that the group was officially disbanded. Big Show would go on to SmackDown, and X-Pac would be released from the company. For being one of the biggest groups of all time, they didn't last but 6 months in the WWF. The original plan of bringing in Hogan and Nash to the WWF wasn't even to have them do the nWo faction. Vince McMahon doesn't like the concept of outsiders coming into the company and being used as that. You could tell that this was true with how the Invasion storyline played out. He wanted a bunch of renegades together, but ultimately they ended up going with the New World Order. When they came into the company, Hulk Hogan was received very well by the WWF fans, and you could tell instantly that he was going to be used as a top single star. He was quickly distanced from the nWo storyline, and that pretty much killed the group from the start. Scott Hall wasn't even really wanted in the first place, and he was battling his addiction with alcohol at the time. To make things worse, Kevin Nash was dealing with many physical injuries, and when he tore his quad on Monday Night Raw, the group was pretty much done. The nWo in the WWF was not the same as it was in WCW, and they added many members to the group who would have never joined the nWo in WCW, including Ric Flair and Booker T. They tried a last-ditch effort to save the group by adding Shawn Michaels, but the group was doomed at this point. It was very telling that Vince McMahon hated the group when he came out to the ring and said the group is done. He only did this one other time, and that was when he ended the ECW brand by coming out to the stage and saying ECW is over. Maybe if they would have done the original Renegade group with Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels instead of the nWo faction, it might have lasted longer than 6 months.